Hello, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this stream. It's a bit of a special stream. We're going to talk a little bit about Ray. We're going to talk about Rails, and as some of you know, I'm not that knowledgeable about Rails, so I've invited an expert tonight. So let me bring on Chris Oliver. Hey, Chris.
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. And you?
Doing good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I thought this would be fun. It seems like something we can accomplish pretty quickly, but it'll be a good learning experience too.
Yeah, indeed. For me, it will probably be a learning experience because you say we'll do it pretty quickly, but as like an outsider of the Rails ecosystem, it seems a little bit daunting to me. It's a little bit of a how do you say that? A humbling experience to step in
Right.
a new like a new ecosystem. So
Yeah, it can be. I think one of the nice things is that, like the Laravel community and Rails they're very similar in a lot of ways. The languages are different, of course, but I don't think a lot of it will start to feel more familiar as you get into it, but there is those things of like, building a library, you have to learn about how does Ruby gems work and what do they need for their configuration and so on. And those are little nuances that, you'll learn, but once you get into building the code, it's not a whole lot different, which is kind of fun. So it'll be good.
I'm looking forward to learn it all. But first, Chris, because probably some people in my audience don't know you as well. Could you introduce yourself a little bit? Well, what do you
Sure.
do? How long have you been doing Rails? What do you like about Rails? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I originally started doing Python and got a job in college working for a professor to learn Rails and Ruby. Just have been doing that ever since. So probably, it's probably 10 years now of doing Ruby and Rails development, which is crazy to think about. So yeah, and like 6 or 7 years ago, I started to do screencasts and just share stuff that I learned about Rails, and that turned into gorails.com, which is where I publish a bunch of videos. And then that led into a few other ideas, like building a hosting product for Rails, so we can configure your server and stuff, very similar to Laravel Forge and Envoyer, and built a Rails template like Spark as well called Jumpstart. And it's cool to see those same things going on in both communities, because Rails didn't have a lot of that, and then Laravel started building all this awesome stuff, and I was sitting here like, why don't we have those things in Rails? Like, we need that. So it's been great to see the communities both evolving.
Yeah, it's cool that you bring stuff from the Laravel community to Ruby, and I think that everybody in the Laravel community knows that I were indebted to the Ruby and Rails community a lot, because we all know that Taylor used Rails as like a prime example, and we share like the same values, like developer experience is above everything. It should be easy and pleasant to use. So I think it's pretty natural that you take a look at the Laravel community as well. In fact, I watched a couple of the videos on Go Rails yesterday. There's like a free course, right, to get into Rails.
Yeah, I just published that a couple weeks ago. So that one's all brand new. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I was speaking with a colleague of mine about it, about like how to get into like an ecosystem. And you always have the question there, should you start with the framework or with the language, because the framework has like all these niceties in it. And now I've also experienced it because I watched the course and I know now how to like create a route and do a little of authentication. But how much does the language do? How much does the framework do? That's always a little bit of a mystery when getting
it is. Yeah, when I was learning Rails, I spent like 6 months just learning Rails, and then somebody asked me to build breadcrumbs, which made me do a lot more Ruby, and I couldn't do it. And I was like, I just realized that I've spent all this time learning Rails itself, and I need to go back and learn Ruby to be able to do a lot of things. And so that definitely is it's a hard thing, because you can start with the framework and get productive pretty fast, but then you realize you don't know as many of the fundamentals. So yeah, you need to sometimes you need just like a quick win where you're like, look, I built this app, and I don't necessarily know all of how it works, but it works, and that feels good, and then gives you motivation to go, dig in on some of the more, I don't know, the less fun stuff. Sometimes just learning the language itself is like not super fun, because you're like, I don't need to learn about arrays, but I sort of do. And, all those things can be a little bit less exciting, I guess.
Yeah, when you start out, you need to have like the rewards pretty fast to stay motivated. You're right with that. Yeah, and yesterday when I was trying to get Ray on Rails, I immediately stumped on such a thing. I was trying to do like an HTTP call. I dumped it in a controller because I didn't know where to do it elsewhere. And then I thought, okay, I need to expect things to a class. But how do namespaces even work? Is it like a thing? And I stumbled upon all those things. And then I thought, okay, I'm just going to wait for Chris to just demonstrate this also. I can see it.
Yeah, there's quite a bit, especially when it comes to like Rails applications are designed to load the files automatically for you as long as you put them in the right folder. But when it comes to building a gem, you don't usually have some of those features. So it ends up being something where you kind of design it a little bit different than you would in your Rails app. But I do like that approach. Like when I build gems, usually I'll go build a Rails app and build the feature right in there and throw it in the controller or whatever, and then extract it out into a gem, and makes it easier for you to go, experiment and prototype it out, I feel like. So I think you're on the right track.
Cool. Okay, let's start a little bit and dig in. How about I just demonstrate Ray and just give you like a small tour of it. I assume that you maybe have already seen the website and tried it out a little bit, so I'm not going to take it too long. And then I'll just dive into how like a call works, and it's very simple. It's just an HTTP call, really.
Perfect.
But let me share my screen here. Share the screen. Which screen? This screen. Share. So you should be able to see it now. And let me hide this one as well. So I have like a little demo application here, and it's a Laravel application, and I got like commands here that demonstrate all the neat things that Ray can do. Let me bring up Ray. Also have here the Rails version, but we don't need that now. Let's start Ray. So the goal of Ray is to have like all your debugging information in like a separate window, because I don't know how you debug in the Rails world, but in the PHP world, we have two big options. On the one hand, we have like Xdebug, which is like the professional way of doing it, where you can set breakpoints and stuff and inspect all the variables. But the downside is that it makes your request very slow, and it can be a little bit tedious to set up. So most people, they use statements like print R or var dump or dd, which all throw their outputs in your browser or on your console. I think in the Rails world, it's YAML dump or something like that. Not dump.
You can do stuff like that. You can also write puts, and that will print out in the Rails logs, but not on the page. So there's a few options there.
Yeah. In the PHP world, or in the Laravel world, at least, we also have info, and that also dumps it in the log. But yeah, in the log, you also have like no formatting abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And in a dedicated window, we can colorize things, we can filter things easily. So that's why I built Ray, because you basically have no formatting abilities in a log, and if you put it or if you dump things in the browser or in the console, it breaks your layout. If you have a lot of dump things, then
Yep.
it gets confusing very fast. So what we can do here, let me take a look. I'm just going to use the dump command. That's empty. So we're just going to send things here. Hi, Chris, like that. And then if I execute this, so you should imagine that you're debugging and you're putting like Ray things all over the place, right? So if I execute this command now, then we have hi, Chris here. And if I'm like in another file, so let me go to something else, and I want to know where this was dumped, I can just click this and we go right where Ray was called. So you can also remove it again, because after a while, if you use like dump or in your case puts, you forget where you put that.
Yep.
I guess everybody has already experienced that. So these things, you can also colorize them. So here we could make this one green. Maybe here we can do hi everybody and make it red. And when we dump that, then you can see that it's red and green. We can filter things here. Also, if you want to clear the screen, we can also do that. We have a new screen thing here. And let's maybe the timestamp or something, so we can see that it really updates. If I do demo now, then we have the current timestamp. If I do it again, then the old one gets removed. We get the new one. And that's basically like the core functionality. There are a couple of more things that it can do. I'm going to show you one or two of those things. And then it's already enough, I think, to understand what it does. This is a very fancy one. So we can actually pause the code in a neat way. So let me execute this one. Pause. And here we have buttons, continue and stop. And here you can see that we have Ray after the pause, but our code is paused here because I'm using that pause call here. And also I'm not getting my prompt back, so this command is still running. And if I do continue, then continue execution, then you can see that we have ended here, that echo, and we have that after the pause, which is a kind of neat thing, I think. And then this is basically, it's a very simple trick what happens here. I'm already going to dive a little bit in the code. What we do here actually is just sleeping the whole time. So we're just pausing execution for a second until the application says, hey, the lock is gone, and then you can continue. So it's a little bit of a poor man's breakpoint, something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And let me show you one other neat thing. We also have like framework kind of integration. So this is something Laravel specific. In Laravel, we have like these classes that are wrapped around mails. So you have like an easy way to control how a mail looks like. And we can actually send entire mails also to Ray. And when that happens, let me do that. Then we actually render the entire mail. So you can just see the rendered version of this mailable on that screen. So just to show you that there are like framework specific things here going on as well.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. Because a lot of, similar to all the error tracking gems, those are almost always Ruby specific, and then they have some special integrations for Rails or background workers like Sidekick and so on in Ruby. So yeah, it makes perfect sense. You'll have kind of your base functionality that's Ruby specific, and then your framework specific things as you get in deeper. Yeah.
Yeah. That's indeed how this is built as well. We have Ray, and that's the framework agnostic one. We have Laravel Ray, which builds on top of the framework agnostic ones. There is also WordPress Ray. But I guess like the Ruby Ray will be something entirely separate from the PHP one, as it's obviously another language.
Right. Yeah, and with these you want to be able to write it in a way that feels natural to the language. So, and that's probably the hardest part is what is the style that Ruby developers look for and PHP developers and Node and so on. And making it feel natural makes a big difference.
Yeah, indeed. And that's why I also need you, because you know like the natural way of doing things. So
yeah,
I'm also eager to see some of the things, to compare some of the things.
Yeah, we'll have to do some look at some examples, like start with a simple one, just like your Ray with a message, and then go into something, a little bit different, like the timestamp or whatever, because there's a bunch of different ways to pull that off. And it'll be interesting to figure out, like, so does for example, your Ray call at the beginning, is that returning an object that then submits immediately, or like when you change the color, is that two operations that get sent over, or does it wait and do that all at once? Those kind of things are, the questions that I will have, like, how do we replicate that?
Yeah. Okay, I'll dive a little bit into the source. I'll already spoil you, because it's an excellent question. How many calls are being made to make something like this green? It are actually 2 calls. So all right, let's make this text. So what happens first is that this sends like an HTTP call to the application, and it generates a certain UUID, and that UUID is being kept here as well. And it's like you said, let me rewrite this a little bit. So this function basically returns an instance of Ray with that UUID filled in. And the second time, this code is equivalent. Because we call green on that instance, we use the same UUID, and the thing becomes green. That's how it works.
Yeah. So you're kind of doing a creation of the instance, and then you're updating that and making it green.
Yeah, indeed. And we do that in that way because it just feels more natural to do, because you don't want to do stuff like, you need to put the color first and then what you should debug. That's really no fun to debug.
Yeah, and you don't always need the color, and all of those things are, need to be flexible in a way. Yeah,
indeed. You don't want to get hindered by like the syntax of Ray. It needs to feel very natural, and by doing it this way, by like returning an instance, most IDEs know like, hey, this return an instance. So we also have like auto completions in good IDE. So here we have the colors and all the rest as well, because the IDE understands like, hey, there's an instance coming back here.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Okay.
All right. Let's dive a little bit into the code of how this works.
Yeah.
So
sounds good.
Let me open up the package itself. So I think it's best that we don't do like any framework specific things now, because it'll all already be a lot, I guess.
Right.
So this is the base package. Let me close up the things that we don't need, just to make it a little bit less confusing. So when we execute Ray here, so the simplest thing is that we can add like a string here, and this can basically be anything. We can add like arrays here, or entire objects, and Ray swallows it all, and it can also just get like how many parameters that you'd like. You can just throw anything in here. Now let's take a look at how that works. So this is the package that is installed into this demo application. And let's maybe start here with helpers. This already might seem a little bit confusing, but this is where that function is being defined. So this is just a regular function. It's just a global function. It works from everywhere. You don't need to have like a prefix or anything, or need to import it. This just works from everywhere. And here we say, just give us every argument that you give it. And these are basically like the framework specific things, but I'm going to ignore that for now. What this thing will do, what this piece of code will do, is it will get like the right kind of instance, and in our case, it will select like the Ray class. This is like the base class, and here we are going to new up that that class. We are going to give it some settings. This is like which port is being used and which host is being used. Most likely it's local host and then our specific port. And then we are going to call something on that class send, and we're just going to give it every argument. So from the outside, this is just it. But the meat of the work is here in that Ray class. So why we have a function here, we could also tell people, hey, use this class, but then they have to like import it, because this is in a certain namespace, and I want it to be as easy as possible. So I don't want people to add namespaces, because if you remove the Ray call, some people have like stray namespaces then, so it's not that magical then, let's say. So this is the class itself. Let me just open this over my entire screen. So this is the class. There are a couple of creation things going on, but let's just immediately dive into what we saw here. This send, where we get like every argument, and I'm going to click through to this. What happens here is that we are going to create a certain payload, and then we are going to send that payload. That is basically the entire gist of what's happening here. I've mentioned payloads, so I'm going to open this payload folder. So these are like the payloads that the Ray, the desktop application, expect for a certain thing. We have here a payload factory, and it gets all arguments, and it will create a payload for every type of argument. So I think we have like a bool payload here, which is a very, very simple one. We have like a null payload. We also have like an image payload for if people send images over. And let me open up one of those payloads here. It's basically a very simple class. And I know that I shouldn't say simple too much, because for me it's simple, but I get that for non-PHP people like you, Chris, it can be a little bit daunting. Just like I do not find the things that you find easy.
Yeah, if you've been doing this a while, you intuit it very easily now, but it took a while to build. And for the most part, it's easily, hopefully translatable to Ruby if you consider using the same class organization and everything. Hopefully it'll be something you can just almost do a one-to-one port of, which would be nice, and not have to change it a whole lot, which would be good.
Yeah, that would be good because that would allow people with a little bit of Ruby knowledge and a lot of
Hmm.
PHP knowledge to also work on the Ruby counterpart.
Yeah, yeah, and so far I haven't seen anything that wouldn't be easily doable in Ruby. So that's good.
That's already good. All right, let me further explain this log payload. So we get some values, and this can basically be anything.
Hmm.
And what every payload has, so this payload, it extends another thing payload, and this is like an abstract class. I don't know if you have that concept in Ruby. It's
Um, not really, but you can inherit, and it will work the same way. So yeah.
all right. You're familiar with the concept.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
cool. So here we just basically say like where is it? There, there is a get content method, and if the specific class doesn't give any content, then we'll just return an empty array. And another important one, but my eye doesn't catch it. Here it is get type. Every payload should have a get type, and this function itself is abstract, meaning that every class that extends from this one should
Hmm.
also have like a get type. And
Right.
you can see it here that this get type is log. And this is like the basic type. If you don't specify a type, then we will just use the log type.
Hmm.
And then we will just send these values over.
Okay.
There's a tiny little bit more to it. Let me go back to the array class. So here we have now a collection of payloads, and then we are going to send the payloads in a request. And in that request here, that isn't like a simple or like a common HTTP request, but we have like a request of our own here. And it basically adds some extra information. We have that UID here that we add that
Hmm.
I've mentioned, and then we have the payloads here. And I've already said a lot, so I'm going to shut up in a moment. But there's one more thing that I should mention, and that is like the where is it? It's been a while since I've written this. The origin. So somewhere here, I think it's in the payloads. Where did we generate that? Let me take a look. What's in the payload class? I'm trying to find where we determine, where's Ray? It isn't here anymore. Where that link was, where we determine like that call came from there.
Oh, right.
So
Yeah.
so we do that with a little bit of reflection. So we have like an origin factory here, and let me see where we've used that in the payload. So in the payload itself, here it is. We are also going to try to determine the origin. And that origin that works with some reflection magic, or not reflection magic, but in PHP you can have like the backtrace, and we
Hmm.
use that backtrace to determine where did it came from. And in that origin factory, there are some things that just hunt down. Hey, in the entire backtrace, is there like array class? Okay, then we should move like 2 frames up, and then we know, hey, the call really came from that file. So that's like a special thing going on.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple helpers that are built into Ruby that can give you, the line of code or whatever, and the file name and stuff that are similar. So you can definitely do, that exact same thing in Ruby. So that'll be good.
All right.
Yeah.
Do you want to give it a shot, or do you want to see some more of the PHP kind of things?
Yeah, maybe we can build maybe the simple log example and see about, getting that wired up and stuff. I will probably need your help to be able to like reference, kind of the same organization that you have with classes and stuff, but we can go dive in and kind of build out a little Ruby gem that we can run a command and write a log to it and maybe change colors or something and do some simple stuff and get the foundations going of what you would end up doing for the complete package there.
Cool. I don't know if you saw it, but I also sent you a gist with like the basic payload structure that could, I guess, be helpful.
Yeah, I've got that pulled up here. That was the GitHub gist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that one will work really well. So we can start there.
Okay. Could you share your screen?
Yes.
There should be a button somewhere below in StreamYard.
There we go.
Yeah, let me remove my screen and put yours up. So now we can see yours.
Cool. Let me make my font a little bit bigger here.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Ruby has a tool called Bundler that is what's used to make gems. And if you have it installed, which it should always be installed on the new Rubies, because I think it's part of Ruby itself now, or it comes with it, you can run bundled gem and give it a name. So we could make a gem called Ray, which is kind of nice. And then choose your test suite, use mini test. So we'll just select that. And then we can do, say, GitHub Actions for, they have a couple things just to kind of help you get your code up and running, which is nice. And yeah, the MIT license will be fine, code of conduct and changelog and kind of the typical things you would want. I
think that's already pretty neat that bundle can just do that for you.
Yeah, it's super nice. And this has gotten better since I've used it last. So these are things that I don't even remember being in there. So now we can open up that code base that it generated and we get a changelog and some example formatting and code of conduct and everything. And your README of like, this is how you'll add it to your application and so on. And then basically the main place that Ruby starts if you've got your application and you include Ray, you will say, we want to use the gem Ray, which will look for this gem spec and it will download your code from rubygems.org. So for example, I have a gem called pay, and it basically, this gem spec defines all of the details on here, your version, which files are included, and so on. So then your application can have a gem file. You say gem pay or Ray, and then you type bundle, and bundle will install it and make sure it's available to your code. So it's already set up an example for all this, which you'll go in and change your authors and your email and the descriptions and so on. But this already sets up the require paths, which means when your application adds Ray, it will automatically require the files in lib. So that will grab this ray.rb. So it comes with an empty module with a class for an error. So you can have errors specific to your gem, and that's it. So this is a namespace module, but your method being global would need something like this. So you could say Ray and the arguments, and actually for Ruby it's just a single asterisk there, and it will grab all of those and save them into an array called args. So very similar. And then you have the ability to call this anywhere if it's defined globally, and then we would go through the process of converting the arguments. We could create an array instance. So we might want to change this from a module to a class, so you can instantiate that, or we would do something else, like have array and a class inside of it for the it wouldn't be like the payload, but it could be an instance or something, whatever that we would call that. But array itself might make sense to just do classes array because that's kind of what you already had, right?
Yeah. That
So
makes sense.
So for this, we could say array.new, and you would pass in your settings, which you might have as something as a class variable. So something that was shared across all array instances. And so that might be something like array.settings to load that. And then you would have your send with your arguments in order to pass those over to the send method here with your arguments, which you would convert into the payloads. And you loop through, if I remember right, you loop through each of these, convert them to the payload, and then make your request to send that over. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. So maybe what we'll do is, and sometimes this stuff, like your example here, I think has a method to JSON, and this is where Ruby gets a little tricky because Ruby has all kinds of helpful methods like toString, but there's a library called Active Support that comes with Rails that adds amazing stuff to Ruby itself. So it's adding these kind of global methods or extending like numbers to be able to say 1.hour, and it will give you that amount of time as an object, and you can like do all kinds of cool stuff. And this toJSON, I believe, comes from Active Support. So that may be either something we depend upon or we rewrite that. And this is NetHTTP Post is a class built into Ruby. So that is what I would recommend. You could use some, another dependency, but it's much easier if you just use something built into Ruby and you don't require Ray to have some other dependency just to make HTTP requests. It's a little bit more verbose to be using NetHTTP. As you can probably tell, this code is like, start and you pass in the host name and the port, and it's pretty explicit, but at the end of the day, it's going to work with every version of Ruby, and like you're not going to have a dependency to worry about. So, something we may do is, so starting out, we would want to do a class attribute, and sometimes these are things that Active Support in Ruby will kind of add extra functionality to make even nicer than some of the built-in Ruby stuff. And I always kind of remember or forget which is which sometimes. So this one comes from, is this just Ruby itself, or is this this is Active Support? Yeah. So this one allows us to set, say, a setting on Ray or settings. And then we can say ray.settings and get whatever settings out of there, which is pretty handy.
Yeah.
And generally that's what we would want to do there. And then I know that we can do like an attribute directly on there as well. So Ruby class attribute. What was the? Been a while since I've written class attributes. I think it's just the @ symbol for that. Here, let's open up IRB and just fiddle around.
Is that like what I recall in the PHP world, like a static attribute, like something that is shared across all instances of the same class?
Yeah, that would be similar. So yeah, because we can have, I guess it's like an attribute on the class itself. So it's in one location. Yeah. And then they can all, if one of them changes it, it's changed for everybody. So
yeah. It changed for all instances of all classes. Yeah. Got it.
So here, if we said settings equals like this, we could say test.settings or not. That's class variable. It's got to be inside of the class, if I remember right. It's been a while since I've done class attributes without using the active support stuff. So I guess we could just use that for now. But
I already got like a like more global question, I think.
Sure.
I think outside of the Ruby Rails world, it seems like Rails is like the only framework that is used, and like everybody just uses Rails. And I also use like Ruby and Rails interchangeable. But are there like other things, or is it common to use like Ruby directly or other frameworks too?
Yeah, there's quite a few. There is Sinatra is one of them that is a very lightweight. I think it's Sinatra RB. It's very simple. I think there's something similar in Laravel that's just like you define the request type and then the route and just write some code, and you don't have hardly any framework at all. So no database wrappers or anything like that. It's just kind of super lightweight. And then there's another popular one, Hanami, that is kind of trying to build sort of the same thing that Rails did, but in a different way with different philosophies, which is used by quite a few people, which is another good one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think in general, Rails is kind of the 90% case most of the time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, so it's best not to depend on any Rails specific things, or not too much.
I would say so. If you're building Ray so that you can use it in anything. So if somebody wanted to build a script that runs in a cron job, you should be able to use Ray to which would be actually super helpful, because if you're testing a cron job on your machine, getting logs out of there is a real pain in the butt. So
we're gonna make that better, Chris.
Yeah, that would be perfect. So yeah, I would generally stick towards, building. You could include active support, and that wouldn't hurt anything. And you could include just the features that you need. But I would try and stick with plain Ruby as best you can, just because it'll be more compatible and less dependencies, less things to worry about. If active support gets updated, you don't have to worry about that. You just got a simpler setup there. So we can use this class attribute from active support just for simplicity. I totally forgot the instance variables or class variables are slipping my mind. But so we should be able to say with this, I think we have to, let's open up IRB. I think we have to, so if we were to just try this out interactively, if we say class attribute settings, this should give us an error because we have to require active support. So now if we do active support and we require active support /all, that'll load all those features. And now we can say ray.settings, and we can assign that to an empty hash, which in PHP, arrays are kind of similar to a hash and an array, I guess.
Yeah.
So what do you call the ones that are like a hash? It's got a different name. Associative arrays or something?
Yeah, also, we have associative arrays, and I don't know the other one.
Kind of like just a list of items.
Yeah, the list of items is also an array.
Yeah, that was always confusing to me, and I haven't done a lot of PHP, but I was like, they call it, both of them are arrays, and I was like, they're different things.
Yeah. For the PHP programmer, it's just the same thing. Just you have one where you have no keys, or they do have keys under the hood, but they're not important to you.
Gotcha.
And then the associative arrays where the keys are important to you.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So let's go and let's just assume that we're going to use active support for this, and we'll go back and clean this up so we don't load all of active support, just the features we need. Yep. But for simplicity here, we would want to go in here and say, basically tell it that we have active support as a dependency. So active support, and we can look up the latest version of that, which is like 6.1 point. Oh yeah, and sometimes they have an underscore and sometimes they don't.
Okay.
Of course.
That's a problem that we have in PHP as well. We have it with function names.
Yeah, it is. It is sometimes pretty annoying. Okay, so we'll do, say, version 6.1 would be our dependency. It's best if you don't have that, and we can refactor and clean that up later, but this is a good starting place.
Yeah.
So now we can set it up so that when this loads, we could just say array.settings equals, say, our host, which we have here.
Yep.
So we could even do, we could split this up into 3 separate things like protocol, host, port if we wanted, but also we could just have it as a simple host string and call it a day, and that's probably the easiest way to go about it.
I think in the PHP version we have like the host and port number, but
Okay.
The protocol is not separate.
Okay.
That's how we do it there.
So let's do that. So we'll say port, and there we go. And so we've got our array method. So we should be able to grab the settings, pass that into this, which when you create a new instance of a class in Ruby, you'll define the initialize method, and that will be given the settings here. So we can say settings, and we can save those settings to a variable. So we'll say instance variable of settings, and we'll assign that. And then we can reference that without the @ symbol by saying add a reader settings.
Yeah.
And so when we call send here, we can say settings, but we could also just leave off line number 8 and call @ settings. Doesn't really matter. It's kind of, you more often will see it this way.
Yeah, yeah.
And so was it your send method that transforms the arguments here?
Let me take a look. So we have a payload factory, and it gets the arguments, and it will convert them inside of the payload to whatever is necessary.
Okay.
So
we could go through. So let's think this out loud. We could go through each of the args and convert them using, say, a payload factory new and convert or something like that.
Wait, let me check the source code of Ray itself.
Okay.
To stay as close as possible to this. So I had send. Pass. This is send. Yeah, we have a payload factory that receives all of the arguments.
Okay, all of them. Okay.
All of them. And
let's do that. We'll say, do you instantiate with that, or do you call like a class method on it?
I call a static method on it called create for values. And yeah, you can also do it's basically that static method that's basically just for nicety. You can also just pass it to initialize. I guess it's in the Ruby world.
Yeah,
it's a constructor. Yeah. And then there's a method on there on the payload factory called get payloads, and that will do like the conversion. Yeah, I wish I could share my screen. Oh, wait, I can share my screen. Let me show it to you. So add this to the screen. So yeah, it's this portion here.
Okay. So, and that is that on the?
That's on the factory. So
Yeah.
in Ray itself, I try to keep the Ray class itself, really like the skeleton that calls everything but doesn't do too much work itself. That's why it's moved to somewhere else.
So let me do payloads equals, and then did this create instances of each of those?
Yeah, it will, per argument, it will return a payload. And that payload, that's an array or a list, I guess, in Ruby parlance of things to send. Yeah.
Alrighty. So let me go and say require relative ray payload factory. So that would be already inside of this lib folder. It will look for the ray folder and then payload factory.rb. And inside here, you just define your payload factory. And so you would have a static method, which is the equivalent of our self dot create with what do I call it? Create with value, create for values with all of the arguments. We can assume they're an array. So then in here, it would map each of those to the payload, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. So is this method creating a new instance of, how is it going and figuring out what type it should render?
Let me check. Get payloads. This get payloads. Yeah, let me show it to you. Add to stream. So for each of the payloads, or each of the values that we give it, we are going to map over it, and for each value, we are going to call a method called getPayload.
So what's your create for values look like? Let's start there.
Yeah. So create for values here, it gets the argument.
It creates a new instance.
Yeah.
And then it calls get payloads.
Yeah.
For it. Okay.
Yeah.
So we would want to call new, pass the argument, and then call get payloads.
Yeah.
And then we can go and implement that. Okay.
Yeah.
So all I did, for anybody who wasn't able to see that, I just put new, we'll create a new payload factory object, and then we will need a regular method here called get payloads, and we'll need our initialize for the argument. And we can do the same as we did up there, or on the other one, add a reader, arg, and then get payloads would return that array of things for array, if I remember
right. I already got a few questions on this, if you don't mind.
Yes.
So you're doing like require relative, and then you're passing in a path, right, to load up things?
Yes.
So for instance, the payload factory, that's just ray payload, and I think you have like a typo there on line 6.
Oh, yep.
Missing a Y there.
Yes.
What if like in somewhere else in your code there's also a payload factory? How does like payload factory on line 20 know like it's that payload factory from Ray?
Right. And actually, that's a great point. This should be under Ray as namespaced Ray payload factory. Then here, because you're already inside or I guess it can't be module because we've already got a class called Ray here. So this has to kind of match the class. So if you've already defined the constant, you need to use it. And Ruby will let you reopen a class. So if you say class test has nothing in it, you can't call test.new.hello or anything. That will give you an error. But if you just reopen it and you say hello, and we'll print out, hey, we can now do that, and it just works. And that's one of the interesting things about Ruby is that you can go and monkey patch stuff. It's not really encouraged unless you know exactly what you're doing and why. But
Mhm.
that allows us to define the Ray class in one file and actually go and add the payload factory inside of it as well in another.
Ah, yeah. So you're making one big class essentially.
Yeah, and really, like, I would probably normally make this a module Ray, and then that is just kind of treated as a namespace. So you couldn't instantiate that the same way as you would with a class. And then because we have payload factory, and that's a typo there too, this being inside of the class of Ray, it's first going to look for a class defined inside of there. And if it doesn't find it, then it would look elsewhere and see if it finds a matching name. So you can explicitly say, I want the Ray payload factory, but it will do the same thing. It will look for Ray payload factory, and then Ray payload factory, and so on.
Yeah.
So that is generally the way you would do it. And actually, there's one interesting thing that if you preface this with 2 colons, it will skip looking inside of Ray and just look for anything at the top level and only grab that. So if you were like I'm building Pay, which is gem for payments, I have a class or module called Stripe in there, but sometimes I want to call the Stripes gem code directly. And so I'll always preface that so it never gets confused which one is which.
Yeah, got it.
Oh. And of course, all of this in theory works until we run it, and maybe I made a mistake there or whatever. But yeah.
that monkey patching ability is pretty interesting in PHP. That just doesn't exist. I can imagine this being very handy in testing scenarios when you just want to, I don't know, not use like the regular client, but just do this and just override it.
Yeah, it's super interesting and it has a lot of really creative uses. One of those I want to show you is that active support stuff where you can say 1.day, and that will give you an object that is like the amount of seconds, but you can say 2.days.from now, and it will give you the time from the current time plus 2 days. And it's just neat because you can just say that and you're not like creating an object or anything. It's doing it behind the scenes. And it's partly because Ruby has parentheses as optional. So like you're really calling a method on the object of number 2, you're calling days and then you're calling from now like you would do in PHP. And I think Laravel's got very similar stuff like this. But it reads even better because you don't have to use the parentheses, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, that's nice. That's cool.
So, and that's another thing too, is that your methods will implicitly return the last value. So you don't have to ever say the word return unless you want to return early, which is another handy shortcut in there.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Cool. Hey, Chris. I'm going to interrupt you. We've already been like at it for like an hour.
Hour already.
Now you're in the hot seat, so for me it's perfectly fine to continue. But if you'd like a 5-minute break or something, that's absolutely fine with me. That's what I do when I'm in the hot seat.
Yeah, no worries. I'm good to keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will continue. I just want to say, if you want to take a break, it's totally fine.
Perfect. Yeah. If I need one, we will. So, yeah. I guess the next part is so your factory is able to analyze the argument and determine what type it should be.
Yeah, right? Indeed. Yeah. Let me quickly show it to you because it's
that is what we'll want to see how you do that.
Wait, having some window management going on here. Add to stream. Yeah, so it's basically this. So get payload. So this is the method that we use when we convert like all the arguments to the payloads. For each value, we're going to call this. I'm going to skip this for a second. We have like a payload finder where like others can register payloads where we are going to look for first. But
Okay.
if we are going to fall through this, then you see like the common cases. If this value is a Boolean, then we're going to send a bool payload. If it is null, then we're going to send a null payload. And we got a couple of others as well.
Gotcha.
And yeah, that payload finder, yeah, maybe we should add it later, but maybe we should just
Yeah, we
do,
can
do the simple stuff first.
we can consider that, this is at some point, this is where that code will go. Because right now, so we have the arguments, and everyone can have multiple payloads, right?
Yeah.
So you have the arg, oops, stuck in Vim. And so this, this is potentially an array sometimes. Is that right?
Yeah, it can be anything. It can be anything. An argument, an object, an array, a list.
Yeah, so one of the assumptions that I guess so at this point, we've got all of those things coming over. Ruby is going to convert that to an array, so we know it's an array at this point. When we go through this to create values, it's going to go through each one of those and pull out whatever it is. It could be anything. And when we go to get the payloads from that, we don't know for sure if it's an array. So we don't know, I guess, in get payloads whether or not we should map through it. One of the handy things that you can do in active support, I believe, or it's something that either active support added or probably array.wrap, and this will basically take the argument, and if it's not an array, puts it in an array, and if it is an array, it just leaves it alone and passes it along, which is super handy for situations like this.
Yeah.
So that's probably something similar to what you're doing there, I would guess.
What you have defined on line 27 there with dev.ray, where you have like the star arguments, wouldn't that always be like an array?
So all of the arguments are, but when you get into working on each one, the individual ones in there, they could be just the number one or a string or something.
Yeah.
And so that's where the get payloads was. So I would, maybe we can pull up your code again and see how you're doing that in get payloads.
Yeah. Again, a little bit of window management. I'm in full screen madness in OS X. Yeah, like this. So we have here that payload finder, and this is for like the specialized things.
Yes.
We have here.
That's get payload, right?
Yeah, this is get payload. Yeah, this is.
Right, so let me make a note of that payload finder, and then the plural version above. Is that on line 37? You do an array map around the value.
Yeah.
So is that doing the same thing as the wrap that we were just talking about, where it says this is possibly an array, but not necessarily?
Well, I'm not really certain that a wrap is needed, because if that value is an array, so let me just put this in code here. If somebody calls this A, or let me do A and B, this is what I call an array, what you call a list, I guess, that we don't want to see in array like A and B, but we want to see like this was an array, so we keep that together, so we don't need to have that wrapping, I think.
Yes. And then but that would be, let's see, is that passed in there as the value?
Yeah. So here, this value, that could be an array, and here is where things get finicky, where I don't know how we are going to do that in the Ruby version. I have here an argument converter, convert to primitive. And this can basically just convert anything, arrays, objects, you name it. And let me show you how that convert to primitive works. So if it are like really primitive values like null, then it will just return those. So if it's a string, then it's just a string, because in the array application, we can just display primitives. So in our JavaScript application, it just understands that. But if it's something else, so if it's like an array or an object, we use something called varcloner and HTML dumper. And if I open up like these namespaces, then you can see that they are pulled out from something called the Symfony var dumper. And that's basically an external dependency, a very well-known one in the PHP world, that's being used to dump everything to the screen. And this is a little bit nasty. Well, what happens here is that it gets converted to some HTML and some JavaScript. Let me just show it to you instead of just talking about it. Let's just do AB and then maybe another array here, D, E, something like that. And let me pull up array. Let's dump this. And you can see here that we have, we say here the array. Here you see that we have those numeric keys. And here there's actually a little bit of behavior on it.
Yeah.
And the nasty thing is that this whole behavior is inside the JavaScript. Inside the JavaScript that, let me pull up.
That HTML dumper produces?
That HTML dumper produces.
Gotcha.
For us. Huh. So I don't know if we have something similar in the Ruby world, because what happens in the PHP world is like, this is what's underlying. If you dump something to the screen, then this is being dumped to the browser, and that's why we have all the neatness already in there. And we didn't have to build it; we could just piggyback on it just by sending it to Ray itself.
Yeah, there is. Ruby has kind of. They don't have anything like that, as far as I know, that will like have the JavaScript and the collapse and stuff for the nested things. But there are a few tools to like pretty print a variable. And so, you would be able to print out something like that, like the array with nesting, and that would be pretty good. That's interesting.
I think it's perfectly fine if we concentrate on strings and numbers for now, and just do that other thing later. Now, I got like a suggestion in the chat here from Adrian to show you one more example, just to make things very clear. Let me go to my other project again. So the demo command. So I've sent here like an array of things. And let me do something here. Hey, hi, Chris. And just dump that. I'm going to clear the screen here first. You see, we have two different things that are logged here. We have the string here, and we have the array here. And we don't log these things separately. I just want to drive that point.
Home. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Because that was one of the the get payloads, and then the individual get payload is one that maybe needs some kinks worked out on. But let's jump into doing the payload, kind of the argument converter thing, and do a basic, if you give me a number, then we'll do this, and if you give me a string or whatever, we can do those simple types.
Yeah. So let me pull that code in, so you have like a fresh look at it. So in the payload factory, we have in the payload. So this is not in the argument converter. In here in the get payload, we already do some checks, just that we don't hit that argument convert. So if it's a Boolean, we already know we're going to use like that bool payload. If it's null, then we do a null payload.
Okay. Do you want to pull up, say, the bool payload or something like that? And I'm actually going to take a screenshot so I can reference the code.
Okay. The bool payload is a very very, no, I'm not going to say easy one. A short one, maybe. So it just accepts the Boolean. It has a type called custom. Well, why we have a custom type? A custom type is something that we added to have some flexibility. So let me just show you what happens if you just send a Boolean over. So let's do ray and true. Let me comment this out so we don't send it again. If I demo this, then you can see that we have like this little label Boolean, and we have true here. If we don't have like that little label, people might think that this was like a string, and here we drive the point home. It's a Boolean.
Yes.
But in order to, in the Ray application, not to have like 100 specific types of payloads, we have like a custom payload where we say, hey, you should use this label, and that's this label here. And then the content is what is being sent here.
Yeah.
And that is the entire bool payload. It's just like a wrapper around that custom type.
Okay, great. Yeah. All right. Maybe we'll dive in and do one or two of those and get them wired up to Ray.
Yeah.
It'll be fun. Cool. So probably what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put like, these are the simple types that we can define here, and then we can set up our null payload and so on for these. So I'll probably do the same thing for our payloads, and I'm going to make a folder called payloads.
Yeah.
Under Ray payloads.
Yeah.
And we'll have our bool, and we can call it bool payload or just bool. It doesn't really matter. It's namespace, so it's kind of whatever you want. And then we'll do this for null and for string int null payload.
Yeah.
We'll do int. And what was the last one? String?
String. Yeah, that's good.
Cool. And then I guess we could do like a base payload that they could inherit from. So that they have, basically just raise an error in Ruby whenever, we don't have kind of the abstract class concept as much. So you would define all those, inherit from that class, and just have them raise an error by default.
Got it.
So we would put, say, class pay array, wrong project, and this could be a module inside of here. It doesn't have to be unless we're going to instantiate the payloads itself. This is more just a namespace, so we can have our base payload in here. And it might just be redundant to call them base payload and so on.
Just name it whatever makes most sense to you, I guess.
We'll go with this for now and just kind of keep the same naming or whatever. And maybe this makes sense to be not inside the module or whatever. But usually in Ruby, you're matching your classes and modules to the same folder structure, and that actually is really useful for loading these files dynamically, so you don't have to require them all the time. And I'm gonna turn notifications off. But this base one had a couple methods. You have your get type and in Ruby, of course, typically you'll have it underscored. We would probably just say type.
Yeah.
And then this would say raise, just raise an error, and it could be anything. Standard error is an example one. There's also, this is probably the better one, not implemented error.
Yeah. That's a dedicated error for things like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And you can say you must define the type method in your payload, something like that. And we can do the same thing for what was the other one? Content.
Yeah, content. Yeah. And so to make it clear, this is like being checked at runtime, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, in the PHP world, yeah, it's obviously also checked at runtime, but it will error it very early when the class gets loaded. It will already error it.
There's some stuff you'll have to check out that Ruby 3 is getting. Some abilities to add kind of type checking to stuff.
Yeah.
RBS and Sorbet are the two popular ones, and Shopify and Stripe are using that quite a bit, and it will help for this stuff a lot. But yeah, in general, this would never run that or raise that error until you called that method. So you would never see it until a day later when someone actually called that and no one else had before. So let's go into Bool, and we can inherit from the base payload, or maybe we just call that payload because that looks like the one that, or the name that you have is in yours already. So we'll keep that a little consistent, and then we'll change that in here. And this one would define, so it has an initializer or constructor. So initialize, we can take the value, and yours is called bool. So let's just do that. We'll say bool equals bool.
Yeah.
And then your type method returns.
This was custom. Yeah.
Just a string of custom.
Yeah.
Your content returns a content. So this is another, I don't think you have the concept of symbols, but a lot of time in Ruby, you will use symbols, and they're like strings that don't get garbage collected very often.
Yeah.
So a lot of times for keys of things that are very consistent, like, settings right here, you'll use a symbol which starts with a colon unless you're inside of a hash, and it can end with a colon if it's the key. Those get garbage collected less. They only store one instance of those in memory, so they're more efficient to use, and you'll see them used kind of interchangeably, but you'll see them a lot of times on things like this that are consistent. You'll always have a content here. You'll always have a label, or most of them will have a label, and the values are the ones that are changing more often.
Yeah.
So here we would say Boolean, and this is the value.
Yeah.
So
that's correct.
Cool. So, and like, people will be able to look at these two classes side by side, and like, it's going to look very, very similar. So that is a good thing. I'm going to close this code here, and we can keep or copy this and go into the integer one. And how's that one look? Is it, I assume, int or integer or something for the?
Yeah, it's basically just the same. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that only string one is a little bit different. It's a little bit an exception. We don't have like any label there because we assume that people will know if there's no label, then it's a string.
Okay.
But I think for now, for consistency, let's just do it just the same. So we don't have to concentrate on the payloads too much, because I think we can add those later.
Yeah. So we'll go and rename these classes to match.
Yeah.
And then this one, it doesn't even really need an initialize because the content will be nil.
Yeah.
Nil is the
Indeed.
equivalent of null. So we can kind of skip that. We don't need to save a variable with nothing in it. So, that one works nicely. And then we'll do the same thing for string. Oops. String. And oh, well, there we go.
Yeah.
Now, all of these will need to get loaded here so we can have our payloads payload. And then I'm going to copy of this 4 times, and we'll have our bool payload, our int payload, our null payload, and our string payload.
Yeah.
All those should be required, and they're in order. So payload gets loaded, so then bool can reference that, or should be able to just fine. And then we can go into our get payload and actually define how that works.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting one that Ruby doesn't have primitive types. Everything is an object, which is kind of even the number 1. When you call plus, that's like a method call on number 1, which is what allows us to say like 1.day with active support. Like you can do that stuff. So you can ask for the class of it, and that's what we'll probably do. Nil has a nil class that's special for it. Strings have a class of string, and integers, but also you might want to deal with floats. So anytime that you have or float class, a class can have a class. That's another fun thing of Ruby. But if you have a float like 1.2, the class will be float. And then true and false keywords have a true class, and false has a false class. And you can even ask for things like, what are your ancestors? Let's see, no, that's false class ancestors. And you'll see that everything in Ruby is an object, and they also inherit from kernel and basic object. And so you can, like when you define a method, I think it gets attached to kernel, which is always available, and that's where like global methods can come from. It's been a while since I dove into all the details of that, but we can use this class basically to take and just say, okay, we have our argument.
Yeah.
And if we ask for the class, we can say when it's a integer, we will do the int payload. And when it's nil class, when it's true class or false class, and we'll have our else eventually to handle anything else. And then a string is just string. Yep. So then we can go through and say null payload new arg. This will be our bool payload, and this will be our string payload. And so kind of end up doing the same thing. And this is where Ruby gets tricky, because you can define a class that, say, inherits from string. And so you can use test to basically operate interchangeably in your code as a string, which is neat. But this probably would need to be more robust in order to handle that properly. And there's some ways of doing it. Like you can say test is a string, and it will say false, but then there's a what was the name of that operator? I just used it a couple weeks ago. But there's one to check and see if test inherits from string as well. So that would be a more long-term approach there, because you would want to use that and say, we could pass in a test object and it will be treated as a string or whatever. And then the other thing that you'll often do in Ruby is you'll just check and say, like, does test.new respond to some method name, like uppercase, for converting it to uppercase?
Yeah.
And it will say true because it's inherited from string and it treats it like a string. And so that's another option here. You might go through and say, can it do these things? And then if it can, we'll treat it as this type of object. Because in Ruby, it just is very often, it's not super often, but a lot of times there are cases where someone will wrap an object in another class and, make it treat it similarly. So like the database record stuff, those queries all operate as if they were an array. But behind the scenes, they're actually querying a database. But, you as a developer don't even really know. You just get these things that work like an array, which is cool. So this is the rudimentary approach, I would say. But work fine, right?
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see all that. And I think if we, in a later session, or when works gets done on like the real payload finder, we will definitely use those kind of like introspection kind of things. Like in the Laravel package, it's also being used to recognize things like models. So models in Laravel operates very much the same way as in Rails. It's the active record pattern. And what we do there is, if you dump like a model of Laravel, it has all of these internal bits that get dumped to the screen. But if Ray recognizes, hey, this is the model, then we're only going to get like the attributes out of it and only send those. And there's a little bit of introspection for that as well.
Yeah, you'll definitely end up with some creative things to do that in here too in Ruby. So yeah, those are quite fun to figure out, but it makes it feel really magical when you do. Okay, so all right. So
this is already looking pretty good.
Yeah. So where is the next step? Is to take we've got the payloads being created, instances at least.
Yeah.
And this is going to return those values to get payloads as long as we call get payload.
Yeah.
In here, and I'm going to remove that for now. But
I get one question. I think it's obvious, but I want to know for sure. Inside of a when arm, it's being returned automatically. The last statement in a when, probably. Yeah.
Yes. And that, so two things are happening. So when the case statement happens, it calls a class and then it returns that and then compares that class to integer. Then the last line of code in the when is returned. And then because this case statement is the last line of code line in air quotes there, the last executed piece of this method, it will return this to up here. So if we wanted to assign this is a payload instance of some type. So it'll be an int or a null or a bool or a string. And so these are automatically getting returned. So it's basically the same as doing a return here and giving it all the way back up to there.
But if there would be like a statement underneath the whole case, then that return behavior wouldn't work.
So if there was a true down here, these would not get returned up here. That this variable would end up being true.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you might see payload equals in your case statement, and then code after that. So that would assign it to the variable, because this whole case statement is kind of treated as its own method call or whatever in a way.
Yeah. And what is being done like in like a typical Rails developer? Will he go about it, he or she go about it in a pragmatic way without any returns, or will safety be chosen and some explicit returns be used? What is the most common thing to do?
The most common thing you will see is guard statements. So up here, it would be like, if arg is nil, then we'll just return, say, an empty array or hash or whatever. And we would just protect at the beginning of it, check the arguments that were passed in or whatever, and then just exit early most of the time.
Okay.
That's a really common pattern. And then in the case of a case statement, you would just have some safe section in the else if it didn't match anything else, and you wouldn't have any returns at all in that situation. So you don't use returns a whole lot unless you want to break out of a loop or, return early from a method.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I like the approach very, very much. Yeah, I think I have a pragmatic soul, so I like things like this.
Yeah, it's interesting because it definitely throws you off if you're not careful about those return values, and it's it doesn't hurt anything to do returns, and that is where I started. Just wrote returns like I normally would, and eventually got used to like, I don't need them. I just have to remember that in the back of my mind. But if you're jumping between languages, it helps a lot just to have returns.
Yeah, I guess that if this package would mature, it would also have tests, and it will protect you against mistakes like return statements going wrong.
Yeah, and we can talk about that a little bit. So the bundle gem command gave us a test suite, which is already ready to go, and they have a little example here. It doesn't do anything, but we can go write a test for say our bool payload. So if we pull this up, we should be able to write a test that bool payloads are custom type, for example. And actually, Minitest is pretty fun. It looks for all the methods in your class that are public and start with the test underscore, and it will execute all of those. And it just looks for that, and it doesn't care, what you name them or anything. It just says, hey, if this method name is public and starts with the word test, then we'll run it. So we can say Ray payloads should be bool payload.
Yeah.
Bool payload new, and pass in true. Then we can assert that assert equal I forget which one you do first. I think you usually say the string first that we're looking for in payload dot type, for example. And let me do that where it's going to give us an error first. And then we just run a command called rake to run our test suite. And this may be where our class of Ray is gonna get us in trouble because of the version expects it to be a module. So that's just kind of the way it defines it by default. So really, let's go and correct that and just make this a module everywhere. And then we may have, I don't know, we can just say Ray or something.
Yeah.
For now, just to organize it the way that it's going to be expected normally.
So a module is just a thing to organize code. It doesn't have anything by itself. It's just where you put classes in, right?
It can be it's an object itself, actually. A module it's kind of like, so you can use it to mix in methods into other things, but it can also have its own attributes and methods as well. So it's kind of like a lighter weight of a class or something in a generic definition.
Okay. Yeah, it feels like a heavier thing, but it's actually lighter.
Yeah. So, okay, did we get all of those? We want module here. And that should get us
the failing tests.
Yes. Can't see the...
Yeah, you can just hide that.
There we go. Okie dokie. So now we can run rake. And we get settings for the module because of this, and that's a little bit different. There would be ray settings now that we moved it. And there's our failing test. The actual result was the word custom, but we're looking for the wrong thing. And this other one is line 10. And we can just really, it's assert false, which is always going to fail. So we're able to, instantiate the bool payload, give it an example. Let me pull up the code side by side here. I got to save that. There we go. And on this side, bool payload. So we're instantiating this directly. We give it a true. We make sure that the output is custom. And we can do the same for the content. So bool payload content, call content. And we would expect it to have match content is true and label is Boolean. And that should just pass. But if I make a typo, it won't, because we need a curly brace there. What else did I do? Another typo? No, this is... So you need... If you're going to do it this way, you're going to need parentheses. Sometimes parentheses are required. There we go. And I made that. Now we have a passing test suite. Cool. So we would obviously go through and just write tests for these and give it different values. Like, you may want it to handle the nil situation. If something, for whatever reason, accidentally didn't pass a Boolean into the payload, then you might want to throw an error or just make sure it handles it safely. It's kind of up to you on how you want to, test that thoroughly.
Yeah.
But we can go through and change all of those. But in general, we know that that's all going to work. You would probably want to build a payload and a test that inherits from this and then make sure it raises the error and so on. Yeah. But we can get back to the next step really is our payload factory is going through each of those. This needs to collect the payloads, right?
Yeah.
So we need.
So what you're doing now for in create for values in the PHP package, that's actually being done in get payloads.
Okay, that's where I was confused earlier.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah.
So this is what we would want.
Yeah, and that's create for values. That is just a helper method, but I think if you just use initialize, that's also good. I've added.
We could args.map and just say new in the arg here. Oh wait, no, we don't need it down here.
Yeah, it's whatever works.
Yeah.
I've in my code I've added like that create for values a little bit separately to just from the outside to say to people, hey, this payload factory, it creates one for every value you give it to me. That's why I have it there.
Yeah, because we we could probably just do maybe get payload there.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll do that.
yeah.
Okay. And then, so once we have those objects, we need to transform that into these payloads for our HTTP request.
Yeah, indeed. Would you like to see how that happens in the PHP code?
Does this work?
That should work, that piece of code, yeah.
Okay. Then this maybe is all we need probably.
Okay.
So let's go into our ray.rb and we'll probably do this was what, a post request? So maybe we'll say
yeah,
a private method called post. And this would, where do you, or what step of the process do you generate the UUID?
That's basically done in the PHP code in the request class. So what is being done in the PHP code is that all the payloads are going in a request object, and that request generates the UUID.
Okay. So we can, maybe add a request class for that.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can do a post helper or just generate the class.
If you want to do it exactly the same as in the PHP world, then there should be a send request method on the Ray class.
Okay.
And in send request, it would accept payloads, and it would give the payloads to a request class.
Gotcha. So we can kind of do something like this, where we get all the payloads, then we pass that to send request. This would instantiate the request with the payloads, and call send or something to actually execute it, maybe.
What happens in PHP code then is there would be yet another class called the client, and the client would receive the request and send it. That's how it works. Gotcha. And it's separated in that way because the client is another object, and we hold an instance of the client on the Ray class, so that in our tests we can give like our Ray class like another client, a fake client to test.
Sure.
That's why it's organized that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's maybe just call it or keep it simple here, and then you can refactor, and add that later.
Yeah.
Sure. So I'm itching to get a real request through.
You need to have like that. That gift to yourself that something works.
Exactly. Yeah.
The thing that we talked about in the beginning.
Yeah. Right. So let's just take our payloads and set them up, and then we can do a send method, which will basically be the code that you have here. So we can grab all of this, and let's see. I don't remember. We'll just generate a UUID like we've got here. So this will just make a new one every request. That'll need to get changed so that you can reuse it or include one when you want to go and say, let's create it, but then let's change it to be green. Those 2-step ones will need, to reuse that, so it won't always be a brand new one.
Yeah.
That is all, stuff that can get figured out. So no biggie. For this, we're setting the Ray settings. So I think we can basically take this. You have to use double quotes for interpolation, but we can say settings. I wonder if that will. No. So we'll say ray.settings host and port. So ray.settings port. And that will generate that URI for us. A lot of times what I will do is just make like a URI method
Hmm.
Just have this in there and kind of simplify this a little bit. And then one thing that's kind of neat in Ruby, if you do an instance variable, let me put this on the top here. If you do an instance variable and you say hello, you don't actually have to define these variables with a value. So this will just be nil automatically. And then there's an operator or equals, and you can say Chris, and now the variable hello is going to be that every time you access it. And so this, you can put this style of thing in here. So you can say URI equals that or equals that. And so the first time it'll be nil, it'll evaluate the code on the right and save it in this variable, then return it. And the next time you call this method, it will just look at this variable and see that there's a URI in it, and it will never run this again.
Yeah.
So that's been like a super handy way to like go kind of extract a method that you can replace a variable, but it still runs kind of as fast as a variable would, which is kind of neat.
That's pretty neat. Yeah, that's a cool trick.
Yeah. So we'll use that because we're gonna have it kind of used a few places, and we can simplify this because this gets a little complicated because we've got the payloads and we have to convert them and render them out in the body before we can send that out. And so really, we always need the UUID, but we've got our payloads in this variable, and we can convert these into this format here. And is this all we really need as the content, or do we also merge in the type there?
I think
Looks like at least in this example, we've got a type and then content separate.
Yeah, you need to have it separately.
Gotcha. So what I might do here is actually go up here and say at payloads, and we will map these to a hash where we have the type, and this is the payload.type, and then our content is payload.content, and it's probably it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it. And you need to put that in.
Oh, and the origin eventually gets in there.
Yeah, but let's hard code that. I think it's required. If you don't put an origin, then Ray wouldn't display it. So you need to have something there.
We will do that, and then so now we've got kind of this will generate from all those payloads the exact same array that we can paste in here that was hard coded.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll say payloads content or something. We can either assign it to a variable, or we can just extract that out to another method, payloads.
Yeah.
Content, or just payloads maybe.
Yeah, it's hard to have a good name for that.
It always is.
Yeah.
That's always the case.
In any language, I guess.
Yeah, so true. So here we'll just call payloads content, and my goal really is just I'd like this to be short and sweet, and that gets us to something that's reasonable.
Yeah.
The real kind of pain point of using NetHTTP, it's built into Ruby, which is great, but it's just a lot of lines of code to make a request, and it's just the frustrating part of it.
If you're already bothered by 3 lines of code, you should see what I had to do for PHP. It's like 20 lines of code or something. Yeah.
I can see that. There's a library that I like that I've gotten used to using this, because the way you use it is you just say http.get and you give it a URL, and you can ask for the body on it, and it will automatically parse things. And then now when I'm like, oh, we got to use NetHTTP, okay, it's fine, but I really wish it looked like the other one because it's so slick. this
Yeah,
is
if it wasn't the developer tool, yeah, we could just pull in the dependency. But yeah, if you
I
try to
think
minimize dependencies, yeah, then you have to use the
this is
minimal
the way
things.
to go. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I think this looks good. So it needs the URI object, and then your headers, and then you get your body. You convert the body to JSON.
yeah,
So it should be able to handle that. And in theory, it will return the response as the result of this method. And that just goes back up the chain.
yeah.
Yeah. And
There,
so,
there's maybe like one important aspect. I don't know if we need to touch it now, if it's difficult to do or not.
okay.
But if the request fails, you shouldn't fail.
Mhm.
Because the idea is if this code get run and the app isn't open, it shouldn't blow up.
Yes. So the way to do that would just be say rescue standard error, and you don't really need any code in here. The way that you can basically rescue from errors is you can either add it as part of the method, like we see here, or you could add a begin block around your code. And that is, probably less often that I'll see that, because you can just put the rescue as part of the method, which is nifty. And
Yeah.
then you can have multiple rescues for different types of errors. So if you wanted some net HTTP error, something specific to that, you would just put that as another block inside of this method.
Yeah.
So yeah, to save, this is going to be ignore any errors.
Yeah.
For us, we probably want to see them for now. We'll uncomment that later. We'll make sure that our requests work. But in theory, yeah, that's probably what you would do.
Yeah. Got it.
Cool. So I have Ray running somewhere. There we go.
Cool. It's always so cool to see it run on other people's machines. I have worked on that application for months, and now it's just nice to see that it's out there.
So good. I love it. Now let me see. So there is.
How do you actually run this? Do you need to like install this inside like a dummy Ruby project or something, or
you can just run. You should be able to run require. It's either require. May need to do require relative here. Lib ray. Yes. Now I've got a typo, so I need to fix that. What am I? Oh, comma here is important. And then, yeah. So you can just basically there's a global variable called load path, and this will show you all the places it will look for files. And you either need to augment the load path with wherever your code is for Ray, or you just do the simple require relative and say we're running in the main folder here. We just want to require lib Ray, and that will load up all of the code that we just wrote. So
cool.
That's it. So if we say Ray right now, what we're going to get is the module. So the Ray class will be the one that actually does the work. But we can see if Ray exists as a method, and it does. So this needs to be Ray settings, because I moved that into the
module
class.
Class. Yeah.
Yes. And actually, there's this may be one from matter accessor. So there's a few of these, and then that's what it was, cAdder accessor. These I think come from active support as well, but you can basically have a shortcut to define a variable or like settings on a module, and it helps basically take care of that for you. So we can use that matter accessor settings. We can just put them there instead. That's going to be much easier to find, so we can access that anywhere. And that is normally how you would do it. anyways, so
Okay.
that'll work. And then to set your default settings is actually pretty easy. So you would say, believe at settings, and we will run IRB require relative lib ray, and we should see ray.settings is our default settings now, so that's good.
Nice.
And then we should be able to call ray directly. Undefined method new for ray module, and that is because we want ray.new there. And I believe, let's try require relative again. I don't know that that's going to, yeah, we'll need to clear out and run IRB again in order to do that. But now we should be able to say hello world.
Our moment of glory, hopefully.
If it runs perfectly on the first time, I'll be blown away. Okay.
Okay. But we can still manage it. It's now a syntax error, so...
Right. Undefined local variable. This is related to what line is it? Line 22. Settings. Oh yeah, I still need my adder reader for settings here. Deleted that a little too soon.
Okay. Okay, that didn't happen. It's still our first attempt, I'd say.
Yeah, just pretend that didn't happen. And this
doesn't happen. No.
24. So I just was missing an S there. This is the live coding joy.
Yeah. No worries. Okay, still on our first attempt. Here we go.
Okay. Another one. We're making progress now, though.
Yeah.
So we've got libray line 38. So that is another typo that I made that no one saw. We'll get there. We're almost done.
Come on.
It's going to be pretty okay. Yeah, so now it got all the way through that and stopped at net HTTP, and that is because I just haven't required net HTTP in our code. So that isn't automatically available. We've got to require it. And
I forgot to put that in the snippet. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just for anybody that isn't familiar. You just go to the docs, and they usually have a good example of how to require that, and it is as simple as you would expect. What I like to do here is basically organize my requires by these are things that are built into Ruby, things from gems, and then all of the stuff, the code that I wrote in separate groups, and that just helps you make sure you know what you're doing there.
Yeah. In the PHP world, there are actually two strategies. Technically, the order doesn't matter. But certain people, they like to do it alphabetically most.
Okay, yeah.
But there are also people that do it by length. They want to have like the pyramid, I
love that, yeah. I think the order would matter in Ruby, but a lot of times like in big Rails applications, you have tons of files and it takes a while to load all of those, especially if you have libraries. And they have what's called an autoloader, which it will basically put a placeholder in for your classes. And then whenever you try and access them, it says, hey, that's not loaded yet. Let's go actually load the file and then replace the constant with the real code that you wrote. So like in Rails, if you go and change code in your controller or your models or something, it will actually go reload the code and replace it and stuff in real time as it monitors your changes. So like all these requires that you have here, you could just define them in here and say, hey, whenever someone asks for the payload factory, go load it, but you don't have to do it right away. And it helps the boot time a lot in big applications.
Yeah.
So, all right. Is this our first attempt that works perfect? We will see.
Moment of glory.
Nope.
No, not yet.
53. Okay, so we have another reference to settings here, and we probably need to pass the settings from our ray object into here. So we have those as well. Because what we've got right now was directly going to ray.settings. And we've already passed them in here, and we probably want to pass them in. So you can override that for tests or whatever, to make it more interchangeable. So when we go through and we do the payload factory stuff, we pass the settings in, then we can save the settings and use those settings here. And I'm just going to do another adder reader of settings so that we don't have to use the instance variable there. And that should be fine. And we can even do the same for payloads as well. So down here could say payloads and just skip the instance variable. And then that means that we've made it all the way down here to the URI being built, which means the next piece is going to be making that request. One thing I will do here is let me throw a binding.irb in. This is a debugging tool that's super useful, but it will just pause execution there and open up a IRB session so you can inspect the variables. And that can be pretty handy, which might be a feature you can add in or whatever. So like right here, it shows this is like the file, and we can ask for payloads content to see what that looks like. We've got a typo in there for a missing payload type. So potentially one of our payload factories is not matching correctly. So something in here is probably not working right. So let's do this there. Because basically, I think it hit the else case at some point. And so it was nil.
I guess arc or something wouldn't be what we expect.
Yeah, so this arg.class is string.
When string payloads.
Yeah, string.
Maybe
string payload dot new arg. String. Oh, this needs to be array payloads. String payload. Ray payloads. What do I got here? Ray payloads payload. Ray payloads string payload. It looks right. Hey, buddy. Cat's hungry now. Wants a snack, it seems like. Here you go. Our guest for the stream. Okay, so this is in payload factory, get payload.
Maybe something in payload itself that is wrong?
Could be.
The
We didn't have
classes.
any of those errors. So let's do a binding.irb here and see if, or maybe, maybe the case is
something that does speak to my attention is that in the payloads, you have a module ray and then module payloads, but here you never reference payloads, the plural. So should that be mentioned in payload factory somewhere, that it's payloads? Colon integer?
I think you're right. Probably right. Payloads.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, that is probably part of it. Although I don't know why it wouldn't have errored out when it got to that point. So
yeah, the error isn't really clear. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see if we can figure this out. What I'm going to do is, because you've already watched me type require relative lib pay array, ray hello world seen me type that a million times already. So let's just run a simple little file. Okay, so we did hit that else, which is interesting. So our arg class is not matching string. Oh, that's what it is. So that I always forget this. So if you give it the value like a number 1 or a string, it will actually automatically check the class for you. So we don't have to go and ask the args class to match. It will actually just work. So here we can do an example of like, hello, when string puts string.
Yeah.
And it,
yeah, I guess you don't need the quotes on.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah.
So that will actually automatically check the class when it sees that it's got a constant in there. So that's probably our issue. And really, we can just raise a standard error for now to save us some time and say unable to match payload type, something like that. So we'll see it and we'll know, and that will give us a better heads up. And then I've got a leftover binding IRB that we can remove.
Yeah.
But it made it that far already, so that should be good. And that should have fixed our problem. So we can say payloads content. And there we go. Cool. So we've got our array for all of that. And when we call to JSON on it, it will convert that. The symbols become strings as keys and all that. So it should all match. And I guess we need to open up array so we can let it run.
Come on.
Hey!
Hey! Wow.
Can you believe it?
Fantastic, man. First attempt.
Yeah. There we go. So that's pretty cool.
That is cool. This feels good, right?
Yeah. I mean, like when you think about it, there was more than we needed to build to get that first test. Like honestly, we probably should have just started with let's send a request and then work our way into abstracting things. Yeah. But like, we went kind of in the deep end first, and that's probably not the way we should have gone about it. But that it is interesting to think about when you're porting something from another language. You probably do skip a bit and go straight for the hard stuff because you're kind of like, I know the organization of it, so we just need to replicate it, and then it should work the same conceptually.
Yeah, where if you make something new, you just start with like the core part, just make that work, and then start wrapping and structuring things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, send one of the other payloads. See if that works. Send an integer.
Yeah.
See if that label works.
Let's do. I gotta refresh here. So let's do ray nil ray number and true. And why not? We'll do false as well.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
Let's go.
Got one. Okay.
Is
Payload
that maybe
factory line 20? Dang. It is probably one of our. So the null payload probably is. Oh, it's the because I deleted that initialize method. We don't need to save the value, but we do need this with an argument for whatever value, like just so it's consistent with everything else.
Yeah.
And, we could put that on payload itself.
Yeah,
or whatever.
I would do that because if other payloads wouldn't need that, then we shouldn't be required to do that.
Yeah, and the default case is like just ignore the value. You don't care. Yep. But when you need it, which most of the time you will need it, it'll be done for you. So that seems like a good solution. So now,
come on.
Hey!
Oh yeah.
False true, integer, all the labels are showing up. We cheated a little bit and just did the labels, but we can get the, the types and other things in there. And really it's just changing a little bit of this stuff
Yeah.
and creating more payload types and the matchers for them.
Yeah.
So, and of course, organizing this stuff a bit, we would probably put the request in its own file. So pay array request.rb module array. Pop that in, and then require request. That should still work. Yay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can use Ray now in your project.
Yeah. Yeah. So cool. This is awesome.
Yeah, it's a pretty good feeling, and this is like the basis of everything that that gets built on top of this, right?
Right. Yeah. It's just kind of going from here and adding in those other types and arguments and whatever, and really it'll come down to changing some of this stuff to make it easier to test, like you were saying earlier. You want to be able to give a fake host and other delivery methods or whatever, and so, yeah.
But I think the next thing that I would do, I not during this session because we're already be going on for quite long, is probably add payload types and get like that reward feeling for every payload that's added. Mm-hmm. Like this one works, this one works.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's one thing that I would still like to do in this session, if you don't mind.
Sure.
And that is how we would like register it on. I think, I don't know how the site's called, the Ruby Gems site?
Yes, rubygems.org.
Yeah.
Yep. It's actually super simple. You will need to, and maybe you'll want to do this so you can own the gem, or I think we can both be maintainers on it. So
okay.
Generally, you will just simply create your gem with bundle gem Ray, and then you have to go into your gem spec, replace these to-dos with descriptions and summaries of your library, and then really the only other command left, I think you have to delete this allowed push host as well. That was a security thing or something, because it will like prevent you from publishing to Ruby Gems out of the box because of this. Maybe they want you to set it to Ruby Gems. Not entirely sure.
Okay.
But once you fill this out, the only thing you really have to do is run rake release, and rake runs command line tasks, and then there's the release task, which will go through. You may have to log in with your Ruby Gems credentials, but it will go and package up the gem. And it looks through here and it says, let's find all the executables and all the code and your dependencies, like active support. And then it builds the gem, and then we'll connect and authenticate with Ruby Gems and push it up. And then the only thing you have to do is change the version number here when you want to release a new version, and update your changelog and whatever normal things you would do. But the version here is referenced actually in the gem spec there. So that is what it's going to use to determine if you made a new release or you're just accidentally duplicating an existing one. So
got it.
Yeah, it's really pretty much as simple as running rake release, and that's it. So not too much. But I'll leave you to do that one so you can be the owner of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we accomplished a lot here. It's like the entire basis. We got that reward feeling at the end. I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, it turned out really good. And got all those types working, and it's really easy to go add new ones. And it'll just take writing some tests and organizing this a little bit better, and whatever. But yeah, made some really good progress, and it's all functional now, which is cool.
Yeah, indeed. I think later tonight I'm going to try to put it up.
Cool.
Maybe
Up for you. And
if my girlfriend allows it, I'm going to add another payload type, just for funsies.
yes.
And yeah, in the next couple of days, I'm going to try some extra stuff here. Yeah, if you want, you can help out a little too. I don't know what your schedule is.
Yeah, I'll see if I can. Yeah, I'll see if I can contribute because, I mean, this is one of the things that I think a lot of Ruby developers would appreciate, because when you're writing a Rails app, a lot of times you'll just use the logger and it's not useful.
Yeah, indeed.
It's just so hard to find stuff. And when I saw this, I was like, "What? This is such a good idea!" And it's so obvious once I've seen you build it already. So yeah, I'm jealous. It's a really good app.
Thanks. Yeah, I was feeling the pain as well of like going through the logs, being confused, and just like if you the longer I think like die and dump debugging is what we call it in the PHP world. It's like super powerful, but if you're in like long die and dump sessions, then it gets not fun anymore. And Ray keeps it a little bit easier. So
yeah, you'll have to. I'm really curious how the what was it, the dumper, the HTML dumper thing. I'm really interested in like how that works, and I think it'll be really interesting to port that over, because I could totally see that being used in just Rails in general, because it's so nice to have the JavaScript to hide and show that stuff, because I've used the Chrome extension to do that and just have it analyze the JSON. But that is nice to have as a feature, which could make for another really good gem that you could add as a dependency. So,
yeah, you make that gem, and I'll use it as a dependency in Ray.
Yeah, I'll have to check out. You'll have to send me the link to the source code for that and stuff, and I'll have to play with it and see if it's something that wouldn't take too long to move over. Otherwise, if it takes a lot of work, someone else can take the reins on that.
Yeah, it could be a little bit finicky. In PHP, it's a little bit finicky because you have like objects in objects in objects that contain all these things, and the var dumper. It's one of like the most downloaded components in the whole PHP world, and a lot of people have laid eyes on it. So it's really, really polished.
That is cool.
Yeah, and I think if you would go about it on your own, you would probably also get like a lot of edge cases that need some love, and I don't know how much love you have for that kind of problems.
Yeah, that's a never-ending project, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. But then again, all open source is like never-ending, or most of it is.
It is true. So true.
Okay, Chris. I think we've done everything that we wanted to do in this stream. I'd like to thank you so much, man. I've learned a ton here, and most important, I'm now motivated to finish this, because when I was starting on my own, it's just so finicky to do if you don't have any knowledge. But with what I've seen today, I feel confident that this will get finished in some way or another. There's
just a lot of the nuances, the ways that you define things in Ruby versus PHP, and you just get caught in the weeds of that, and you're like, I just wanted to go build this app and I can't because I'm just stuck here. So it's really nice to be able to help out and get this going, and I'm excited. This was a lot of fun. Turned out great.
Thanks, man. I had a lot of fun as well. And we'll see. I hope that we can do this again in the future if there's like a more advanced feature where it's also fun for you to work a little bit on.
Yeah, that would be fun. Yeah, maybe it's that var dumper.
Yeah, and if you ever want to do something in the Laravel or PHP world, you got a friend in that world.
Yeah.
I'll help you out.
That's great. I'm so excited that, you know, Laravel's doing such great things, and it's inspired the Rails community a lot. And so it's, you know, they're such good, similar philosophies. And we just want to make people productive. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
So,
and
great.
people should have like fun while coding and not be like digging in the weeds the whole time. Just have great EX.
Yep, agreed. So, cool.
Okay, man, we're there. We're at the end.
Yeah.
Until next time, Chris.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Okay, everybody, that was it. Thanks for watching. Thanks again, Chris. And until next time, bye-bye.